just wanted to make sure before I dove into the content. So yes, again, we have some tips and tricks and some best practices and promising practices, but again, we know that this is really individual and specific to your health center, and that it's complicated, like I said. So with all of that said, next slide. Perfect. So what is a compensation plan? It's important to think about what this even means. So a compensation plan, which can also be referred to as a total compensation plan, encompasses all of the compensatory components of an organization strategy. So the employee wages and salaries, benefits, and total terms of payment. Employee compensation plans also include raise schedules, all fringe benefits, and any union perks or employer provided vendor discounts, anything like that. A strategically designed compensation philosophy that is kept current, relevant, and in accordance with employment laws supports several important components of your organization. It supports those strategic plans, budgeting and business goals, industry competitive challenges, operating needs, and the total reward strategies that support retention of your top talent, those staff that you really love and need. Next slide. All right, so your compensation plan must be equitable, competitive, effective, and sustainable. This will make it attractive to potential and current staff, and it'll maintain that fairness and equity that Michelle talked about and gave us that baseline on. And part of what's so important about, of course, we understand that it's, as like health centers sometimes have a hard time, being competitive in terms of salaries, but there are ways that you can make up the salary in those other benefit elements. And that's why it's this total compensation plan. It's not just the salary, it's these other things that are involved in what it means, how your employees are being compensated for working with you and at your health center. And then of course, this element of being sustainable is incredibly important. If you don't want to make promises that you can't keep. You don't want to start folks out and then realize that you're struggling to maintain that compensation, again, whether it's the full salary or those other benefits as well. Next slide. Great. So we also want to focus on eliminating pay inequities. And to do this, it's important to conduct regular pay audits and maintain that transparency and fairness that Michelle was talking about. And then we really encourage folks to move to stop using salary history when you're deciding on someone's salary. And it's important to create those equitable, inclusive, and fair salary ranges, posting them in the job announcements and sticking to them. And we like to highlight this because it's so important to remember that within these inequitable systems, we know that Black, Indigenous people of color, women, LGBTQ plus folks, and other represented communities have historically been paid less. And so when we rely on those salary histories, we're continuing and perpetuating those inequities instead of just saying, this is what we have to pay, this is what we know this job is worth, and we're going to pay people based on this salary range, not based on what they've been paid in the past. And this is also a really important way to make sure that you are attracting folks who that salary range appeals to them and feels right to them. And you're not attracting folks who then, when you offer them the job, they say, oh, no, that's not enough. Instead, you're putting out there exactly how much you have available, exactly, again, how much your organization feels the position is worth, and then you're sticking with that, and folks won't be surprised. And again, you'll be working to undo that systemic and historical inequity. Next slide. So then I know I mentioned that part of your full compensation plan is to think about those things beyond salary, but it is important to think about your benefits, focus on what they can be, and think outside the box. And then again, as you'll hear just throughout our presentations, and as Michelle laid the groundwork for, we encourage folks to really ground their benefits and their salaries in those JEDI principles and think about equity, be inclusive, and be flexible. So here, this is just a list of some questions to consider and think about as you're creating your benefits package. But think about if your healthcare includes transgender care. Are folks able to get that gender affirming care that they need as your employees? And again, it's really important to do this, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it will be a retention strategy, it will be a recruitment strategy, and in the end, it will trickle down into that patient care. You know, if you're saying, oh, we're a health center that's open and affirming to folks with all kinds of identities, and we want to be affirming in that way, but then your own employees who are transgender can't access the care that they need for that gender affirming care, your patients will be able to tell, and it will come across in how they present themselves, and how the culture of your organization is perceived. So it's important to think about that. And then we encourage folks to think about whether they have parental leave. Is it paid? Does it include whichever kind of parent a person identifies as or is? Are your holiday offerings flexible? Do they include folks from different backgrounds or belief systems? Are they purely based on Judeo-Christian holidays, or are there flex holidays, floating holidays? Are folks from different backgrounds able to take the holidays that mean the most to them? And then do you offer mentorship programs? Again, if so, are they specific to BIPOC and other underrepresented or systemically marginalized groups? You know, it's so important to be able to learn from folks with similar backgrounds to those that we have. And then are your training programs offering students what they need beyond just, you know, an education? Are they really supporting students to become the best clinicians or providers they can be? And then does your leave policy define family broadly? We think and talk a lot about bereavement leave in this instance specifically. Often we see that bereavement leave applies to immediate family only, but in a lot of cultures, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents are considered part of that immediate family. And it's really important to make sure that during a time of grief and a really hard time for your staff, that they're not having to think about, oh, am I losing vacation time that I would need to recharge in this instance that is not going to recharge them, of course. And then how much emphasis is put on that continuing education and career ladders? And Michelle's going to talk more about career ladders in the next section, but it is really important to think about how we're supporting our staff and employees to continue to grow, continue to become their best selves, both as people and as employees. And then, do your benefits take into account parents, especially single parents? Are you offering any kind of assistance around childcare? Are you thinking about how families can take advantage of the different pieces of your benefits package? And then how important is work-life balance in your benefits package? We think and talk about work-life balance so much in terms of employee wellness, but that's what your benefits package is really focusing on, is how well are your employees able to be given the benefits that you are extending to them. And part of being well is ensuring that you have work-life balance, and when you go home, you're not taking the stresses of work home with you. And most importantly is this bolded section at the bottom around speaking with your workforce about what they need and want. You know, we at the Star Center, we hear a lot from folks about what they're needing, what they're wanting. We also do a lot of research to back all this up. But again, getting back to that element of this is really specific to you and your health center. We cannot know what is best for your staff. The only people who know that are your staff themselves. And so ask them what they want, ask the workforce how they could be better supported and what would help them feel, again, that well-being, that sense of well-being, that sense of being valued, and how you can use benefits and compensation to retain them really well. So I also wanted to just highlight that in this comment from Michelle, that in the last breakout room, there was a great conversation in using mentorship during the onboarding process and how it can also reinforce the mission and values. And I absolutely love that. Totally agree. So before we go into our breakout activity, I just wanted to see if there are any thoughts, questions, reflections on any of this content, again, before we launch into our next little activity. Suzanne, we can't hear you.
Double muted strikes again. So this is sort of just something also to let you guys know is that we have, so while we're not really focusing on the ins and outs of setting up a compensation program per se, because as Helen mentioned, so complicated, there's so many ins and outs, and we often get things where people are just like, you know, what do we pay people? Well, unfortunately, we can't just tell you what you should pay, right? It has so many, as Helen mentioned, it's just so complicated. But we do have some archived webinars from various sources, from experts and things. So I know, like I said, we're focusing on, you know, some different things today. But if this is something that you want to dive a little deeper into, we do have some archived compensation resources on our website. So just wanted to plug that before we go into our breakout rooms.
Thank you, Suzanne. Absolutely. And yeah, I think part of what's so complicated about this beyond each individual health center is that, you know, is just that everything is different, not just state by state, but community by community. You know, I live in Denver, and what is needed to be a thriving wage and what is expected in Denver is really different from, you know, the Western Slope out here in Colorado. And so again, like Suzanne is saying, we can't say, oh, this is exactly how much you should be paying each person at each licensure level, but we can say, here's some things to think about and consider as you're creating those plans and programs. So with that, we'll launch into our activity, and Mariah will be putting, again, a link to the assignment document and those compensation slides. We'll again take just a few moments to take about 10 minutes to do this compensation assignment, and then we'll take about 10 minutes again to discuss in our groups, and then we'll come out and do breakouts, and they'll be those same groups. So we'll see you in your breakouts. All right, great. Welcome back, everyone. I know my group was having a really robust conversation, so I hope that that is true for everyone. I'll share my screen again, and we'll go sort of the opposite direction. Instead of starting with group 1, we'll start with group 4. Let me share my screen. All right, so who is our speaker from group 4? Well,
I can go. I mean, I can go for our group since I took notes, but I'm also happy to let one of the participants share as well.
So do we have a volunteer besides Suzanne?
I'm volunteering Suzanne. We are a group of introverts, so take it away, Suzanne.
Okay. I think you guys did a great job. So a couple things, I won't share everything just for sake of time, but I will say one thing that we talked a little bit about as far as like true compensation. I know we're probably going to have a little bit bigger discussion about benefits here in a second. But MAs, the salaries for MAs that several folks the salaries have just really just grown exponentially. And so there was, Heather actually shared that she is in downtown Indianapolis, and there's 7 other FQHCs that they could go to. And so that has, I believe it was $25 an hour that MAs were being paid. And so while it's great that, you know, from an employee perspective, that their salaries are being raised, but they just don't know if it's sustainable. So, that, again, it's that sustainability piece, Helen, that you were talking about, that stuff. And it's a big challenge to really, get people and have them stay as far as that goes. But one thing she also did share, and a couple people talked a little bit about, was having something that shows. So that's a challenge. But on the positive side, there are a couple people who shared that they have a way to share for their employees to share their entire compensation and benefits package. So it's not just like, okay, what they're being paid for salary, but how much are your benefits, costing? Because that's really, the reality. How much are the benefits costing the organization, and how much it's not just that, they get, you get paid $25 an hour, and that's your salary, but how much does your health insurance cost the organization, and how much does your vacation time, and so all of that. And so being able to show that has been really a great retention tool for them. And it can also be something that can be a great recruitment tool as well, just to show, how much that folks are showing for each employee as they're coming on board. A couple other things. So Monica shared that as far as a strength, that they actually make sure that they're doing either an annual or an ongoing review of compensation and benefits. So it's not something that, they just establish a salary range and they just stick it on a shelf and say, this is what we're paying people. They really review it on an ongoing basis there. And then a couple other things, challenges. Folks were sharing that as far as like just generally speaking, what they're struggling with, that wage compression has been a big issue, especially with MAs, as I just shared, and then dental hygienists and also mental health. Dental hygienists, MAs, and mental health have been tough to really retain and then also recruit as well, especially because when it comes to compensation. So feel free to, if I missed anything that you all want to share, feel free to do that, to share. But I think those are about the highlights.
Awesome, thank you. All right, let's hear from group 3. Do we have a report out person from group 3?
So that's the group I was in, and I see that Ashley had to step away, and Carolina as well. Yes, I think that's funny with the introverts, Heather. I'm definitely an extroverted introvert. So I just want to see, Yadira, if you would like to share. If not, I am happy to do that.
Sure, I can go ahead and share with everyone.
Okay.
Just in talking about what I guess our organizations are doing right in the overall benefits of our staff, whether it's providers or general staff, there's a little bit of a division, at least in my organization, and it's kind of being felt, I think, a little bit more nowadays with burnout and things kind of being more prevalent. And then of course, you have organizations around that are supporting MAs with sign-on bonuses or RNs and things. So I think the divide is kind of being more pronounced, I guess. We've done a lot of work with the provider benefits aspect of it, but not so much with the rest of the team. And then at least in my area here, some areas to work on would be definitely the fairness of, we do have quite a bit of our staffing that are in various departments that are unionized. So there's a fairness aspect between those that are union versus non-union. And just an overall need for transparency, I think, for both sides. So it would make it, I think, more fair for everyone just to kind of realize and understand what that means, that when you're not a union member, this is what they have or what they need to do for their CBA or their agreement, versus the rest that are not under a CBA or agreement. What kind of options or compensation is available to them. But I think we pretty much have, with Carolina and Ashley, I think we pretty much have the same thing in terms of benefits, overall being a good thing. But the transparency was definitely something that we all felt was lacking.
Thank you, Yadira. And Helen, if it's okay, I wanted to add one other thing that was discussed in the group.
Yeah.
So I thought it was perfect. I thought it was just really great because talked a lot about that lack of transparency. And one of the things that I mentioned is sometimes leadership may not realize it's a little bit of a fallacy because these are nonprofit organizations, and people will go and look up the information on what salaries are. And staff will share salaries with each other. And I'm speaking as a millennial, and especially Gen Z, it is a very common practice in order to assess pay equity or not. And it is all accessible, legally has to be accessible out there in the tax returns. And sometimes people don't realize how actively people are sharing this information. So that lack of transparency, and many times, whether leadership realizes or not, actually doesn't always exist, because so the more that you can have transparency or at least conversations with your staff, the more likely you are to engage in those pay equity, just the conversation, people, even if it's saying, this is not something we may be able to sustain later, things like that, I think people do appreciate that transparency part. But I just wanted to mention that, as I said, as a millennial, and then I know Gen Z very much practice, they do as well. But I think it's an important thing to point out, when we talk about transparency and practices of the different generations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point. Thanks, Michelle. All right, from group 2, do we have, oh wait, no, that still says group. All right, there we go. And it looks like Mike again filled it out, but I'm wondering if Mike, you would like to share, or if anyone else from that group wants to share.
Sure, I will jump back in. One thing that I am actually quite impressed with CCI, with my organization, is the approach this is all also, by the way, this is coming from a physician recruitment perspective. So from recruiting providers in, the opportunity to move from a negotiation on salary and discussing terms and conditions up front positions me in a really nice opportunity to be able to come across as more transparent and be able to reflect that our rates, our salary, our compensation is really directed from our board of directors. And that's transparent all the way through our organization down to myself. So when I'm discussing this with our candidates, it becomes really straightforward, okay, that this is something that's not negotiated. It's rather provides a more transparent, the quality component is there, okay? And essentially what it does is there's a set of compensation, the actual values, okay, or set by the board of directors for subset of, for each provider, for each specialty, for the amount of time, their licensure, all of that is taken into account. And there's an entire rubric, okay, that is used, okay, that I understand that is, reviewed every year, and to try to meet this, I would call it, there's an equality part of this, okay, that allows for, and transparency, okay, that one provider at the same level is not going to be overcompensated more so than another, or even undercompensated. So with that intact, okay, it makes my position a little bit easier, okay, at the same time to identify that, well, this is not a negotiation. This is something that is part of our structure as a federally qualified health center. A little bit different than what I've done in the past, okay, but it makes it really nice and having that conversation. I always find that the providers are open to that. They're very acceptable to that. And to date, I have not had a provider turn down the opportunity based on salary. So it works, okay? And as opposed to having to negotiate and being turned down in the past, I've been used to doing that. So it makes a very interesting perspective. I haven't looked at this before, but it is, I think, quite unique to what I see here at CCI. So I was quite impressed with that when I first came on board. And I just have to recognize the company for actually having this in place. It makes my job a lot easier, okay, with starting out in this capacity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know that, I think often when we talk about this, that we end up focusing a lot on the challenges because we're trying to, solve problems. But I really value you sharing this strength and this approach that is working and sharing that with all of us, so that, we can take that back to our organization. So thank you. Awesome. All right. Now our final group, I know who the volunteer is, but I'll let you say it yourself.
Hi, my name is Danielle. I'll just talk through what we discussed. And so I work at a FQHC that's in California, and it's a little crazy out here, but with compensation this year, one of the big tasks that we started at the beginning of the year was implementing a formal compensation strategy for all of the positions within the company. And it was a big kind of undertaking, but we were able to make adjustments based on that for the employees that needed adjustments. And then within our hiring practices, be able to utilize a formal kind of structured approach for compensation for our new hires. And then we also implemented a new incentive in our benefits package, which was a matching for 403B. And what we're finding is that our matching, we do up to 4% and 100% vested immediately. That's tough to match with other employers in the market. So that's been a good strategy for us. But then on the side of continue to work on, I think we've got to get better, faster, more adaptable with the changing market, and being able to continually reevaluate where we're at with compensation. Are benefits good enough? I mean, the benefit thing, traditionally annually, but with compensation, if we have to make a shift or adjustment mid-year, we just have to do it. So it's utilizing this new resource more effectively to help us recruit and retain. So, and then Terry Ann, she was talking about prior to the pandemic starting, they did have already in place a really good compensation structure, but throughout the last year and a half, it has been tough to keep up with. So and she even noted, there's travel organizations that had laid people off, and they were able to bring in some of those employees. And then as things have shifted and the industry has picked back up, it's been tough to match the compensation that these companies are offering now. So just meeting that demand and increases in minimum wage has made a large change as well. So it's just difficult to keep up with. And then it kind of just tears up from the bottom up, right? So if you're paying your MAs more, it tears up all the way to providers, managers. And Alm had mentioned that, they had put together a pretty aggressive base rate for what they identified as a living wage in his area. And he's continuing, and they're continuing to see things, progressively have to move up. So, one of the things that he mentioned in terms of just getting better at it is shifting positions, and being flexible and adaptable to making the changes that are needed. And as a lot of us are experiencing, vaccination requirements are just making things tough. And so just the competition level all around is making it difficult to be able to keep up with what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. So we have about 2 minutes before we move on to our next piece. And I just wanted to see, I saw one creative benefit, but I wanted to see if anyone had any other creative benefits that they're currently using that they wanted to share or highlight. The one I saw, I believe, was from Patricia around ski passes. If you want to share about that.
Sure, I can share about that. Our FQ is between Breckenridge and Vail ski resorts. So one of the perks we have for our employees is a shared ski pass, but you have to contribute to another nonprofit called the Summit. Oh gosh, I'm blanking now. The Summit Foundation, and it gives back to our local children in the community. So it's a good way to give back to the community. And with a minimum amount of $5 per paycheck, you get to have access to a calendar for the shared pass, which is 7 different ski areas in the area. And you can sign it out to ski for the day or give it to a friend or family to ski for the day. And the average ticket price at Vail goes for $190 a day if you were to walk up to the window. So we think it's a really great perk. And I'm amazed at how many employees actually contribute to it. It's more than 75% of my staff.
That's awesome. I love that because it's like specific to where you are. This is a benefit. This is probably part of why a lot of those folks live in Summit County or up where you're oriented, where your health center is. And then I also like that it creates this connection to the wider community as well. So it's sort of like grounding and connecting folks to the community, and then also is specific to an interest that many folks in that area have. So that's great. Really quickly before we move on, does anyone else have an exciting creative benefit they want to share? If not, we can move right along to our.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Kimberly, and I work with CCI, one of the senior physician recruiters as well. And one of the benefits that I think is very unique is CCI gives a $5,000 copay card. So when you go to see a physician, whether if it's you're a single employee or for a family, you can use the $5,000, or it's for copays, so you never have to come out of your pocket with the copay. It's just based on the card, and every year is reactivated, so every year you get $5,000 back onto the card. You don't carry over the amount if you have any, and I haven't seen anyone that used the whole amount yet. However, you still get $5,000 in January.
That's awesome. That's such a cool creative way, especially for organizations that are focused on health, to show your employees that not only do you care about patients' health, but you care about your employees' health, and you want them to not hesitate to seek the care they need. I love that. That's awesome. All right, great. Thank you so much. So next we'll be talking about those career ladders and work schedules, and Michelle can take it away.